Welcome back to another video, guys. Today we are working on a 2020 RX350 F-Sport model. Customer took this car to the dealership and they recommended replacing the rear brake pads. We're going to go ahead and do that. This vehicle is equipped with the rear electronic parking brakes. So I'm going to teach you how to do this at home. No crazy special tools needed, just your regular brake tools. So first thing you want to do once you have your vehicle parked in the area you're going to work on, you're going to disengage the parking brake. Do that by turning the ignition to the on, engine off position. And if the parking brake light is illuminated, the parking brake is engaged. So go ahead and step on the brake pedal, push down on the parking brake button, and you will hear the parking brake disengaging. And once the light is off, you know your parking brake is disengaged. Next, you want to pop the hood. Go ahead and raise it, and you want to inspect your brake fluid level. You want to make sure it's not too filled, because when you do replace the brake pads, the fluid can overflow out of the reservoir. This one's hard to see, but I can see that the level is right there where my finger is, right below the maximum, so we should be good on that. So now I have the rear of the vehicle raised up, supported on the jack stands. Gonna go ahead and remove the tires. If you don't have any power tools, you want to loosen up the lug nuts while the tire is on the floor so it doesn't spin on you. But if you have power tools, raise it up and then remove the lug nuts. Tires removed. Next step, you want to remove the electronic parking brake actuator connector. Just push down on the tab and remove it, and you do that for both sides. Next, we're going to work on removing the 14mm caliper bolts. In order to remove those, you need a 17mm to hold down the sliding pin. It should look like this. The reason you need it is because as you spin the caliper bolt, it will spin the sliding pin with it. So let's go ahead and get that removed. As you see, these 14mm bolts have Loctite on them. That is why it'll spin the sliding pin with it. Let's set those aside. Next, we're going to remove the caliper now. Go ahead and wiggle it back and forth out of the brake pad area. Once you remove the caliper bracket, go ahead and set it on top of the rear knuckle. We're going to work on removing the rear brake pads. As you remove the brake pads, pay close attention to where each brake pad goes. They are a little bit different. That will help in your installation process to know the corresponding location on each brake pad. Now we're going to remove the 19mm caliper bracket bolts. Get your power tool, your wrench, ratchet, whatever you have. I have both caliper bracket bolts removed, caliper bracket removed. Go ahead and set that aside. Next step. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove these 5mm hex bolts that's holding down the parking brake actuator in order to remove it. There I have removed the 5mm hex bolts, and we're going to remove the parking brake actuator by working at it back and forth, up and down, because there is an O-ring holding it down. There I have it removed. Next, we're going to get a 6mm hex bolt. We're going to stick it inside of the parking brake actuator mechanism. And to disengage it, we're going to turn it clockwise by hand. You don't need a ratchet. You're going to work at it, spinning it clockwise until it stops. Doing this retracts the parking brake mechanism from the brake caliper piston. So do that until it stops. Doesn't go anymore. Now we can retract the piston with the regular brake caliper retract tool. Go ahead and squeeze in the piston until it's flush. Right there. Remove my tool. Piston retracted. Next, we're going to inspect the disc. Make sure it's good to resurface and reuse. It's measuring 17.83mm. The minimum is 16.5. It's good. When you measure, you want to measure 3 different points: inner, outer, and center. on 4 different sides of the rotor. So you spin it, you measure on 1, 2, 3, 4 different sides as well. This rotor is good to reuse, so now we have to remove it, but it's stuck onto the hub. So what you want to do is, see these holes right here? These are access holes that Lexus has made on their rotors. So you can screw on a bolt with the right thread pitch to help aid in removing the rotor. As you screw in the bolt, it's going to push the rotor out. So to help it also, I spray some lubricant around the studs and the hub. And when I screw in the bolt onto the hub, onto the rotor, I'm sorry, see how it pushes it out? Makes removal way easier. Go ahead and do it on the other side as well. It just makes removal of the rotor way easier. So now we're going to go ahead and send these out to get resurfaced. So before we resurface the rotors, you want to go ahead and remove any surface rust. I have this wire wheel attached to my drill and just work at it until you can clean it as best as possible. You also want to make sure you work the back of the rotor, removing any surface rust as well. There you see the thickness in case you don't have the specs. Next you want to sand down any surface rust on the hub. I'm using the wire wheel, but if you don't have a wire wheel, you can also use sandpaper just to remove the surface rust. So while the rotor is being resurfaced, I'm going to show you how to set up your brake pads and your brake shims. You got a pad with 2 blue marks on the side. That's going to be your outboard pad. You got a pad with 1 blue mark on the side. It's going to be your inboard pad. Now every pad has its corresponding shim to it. I'm going to show you how to set it up. You can refer to the old pads, but if you don't have them, I'll show you how to do it. Get a little bit of brake grease. You want to dab the back side of the brake pad, just like that. Do that to both of the brake pads. Next, we're going to get the darker shim. We're going to grab the shim that does not have the tab on the side. That one's going to go on top of the inboard pad. You want to push down till it's flat on the pad. Dab a little grease on top of that. And we're going to install our shinier shim, also one without a tab on the side, right on top of that. Just push down on it till it's flush. Next, we're going to be working on our outboard pad. Always go with the darker shim. That one goes first. I'm going to go ahead and install that. And notice how I use the shim that has a tab on the side. That one goes on the outboard pad. I'm going to dab a little bit of grease on top of that. Then we're going to install our shinier shim. And notice how this shiny shim also has a tab on the side. Push down on it till it's flush. Easy as that. Next step, we're going to go ahead and install our brake wear indicator. That one is going to go on the bottom side of the brake pad. Next, we're going to go ahead and lube the contact points in which the brake pad contacts the brake caliper bracket hardware, just to reduce friction and also to reduce noise. This is how it should look. Not a lot of grease on the contact points, just little dabs. And that's how the indicator should look when it's installed. And the brake shims as well. Next, we're going to go ahead and set up our caliper bracket. We're going to clean up all the hardware. We're going to go ahead and reuse it. It's still good condition. The way that I clean it, I get a wire brush. And then just clean the hardware as so. It's kind of hard to do it with one hand and then with the other hand recording. So I'm going to put it down and clean the hardware. Got the hardware clean, top and bottom. Now the next step is that we're going to lube the caliper sliding pins. I'm going to go ahead and both pins, one at a time, remove them. Twist them out if you can. Got one removed. Go ahead and dab it with some grease. Do the next one. Go ahead and remove it. I got like a little over 1,000. We're gonna go ahead and lube this one as well. And we're gonna install it back into the caliper bracket. There we go, we got both sliding pins installed and lubed. And we also want to make sure that if there's any excess grease, be sure and clean it and wipe it down good. Rotor resurface, pay attention to these two holes on the rotor. Want to make sure that when you install it, they correspond to the marks on the hub. You want to install it the same way that we removed it. There goes the other mark right there. I also scratched an L on the back of the rotor, indicating left side. Now that it's installed, I want to go ahead and I grab a lug nut and screw it all the way onto the stud to keep the brakes from moving, or keep the rotor from moving as I work on the brakes. Next, we're going to go ahead and install our caliper bracket. Next, I'm installing my caliper bracket bolts, screwing them down by hand. Next, go ahead and finish it up and tighten up these caliper bracket bolts. I'll go ahead and I'll list the torque specs up above. It's very critical that you torque all the brake components. It is a safety issue. So make sure you follow the proper directions when tightening these bolts. With the caliper bracket installed, we're going to go ahead and install our brake pads. Grab the one with the 1 mark on the side. Remember, that's your inboard pad. So you want to go ahead and install it. I'm going to push on the brake pad until it's fully flush onto the rotor, properly installed on each of the caliper bracket hardware. I'm going to go ahead and grab our outboard pad. Remember, the outboard pad is the one with the 2 marks on the side. Properly install it. Want to make sure both pads are flush and properly installed. Brake pads installed, we can move on to the next step, which is installation of the electronic parking brake actuator. This piece right here. Now notice there's an O-ring on the caliper. This causes a little bit of resistance when installing the actuator. So just go ahead and grab your actuator, line it up, and slowly work at it side to side until it's fully flush with the caliper. Okay, here I have the parking brake actuator installed. As you can see, it's flush with the caliper, and it even has these marks on the side of the actuator indicating proper alignment. So you want to push it down, wiggle it back and forth until you get that proper alignment, just like that. It's on both sides, as you can see. Once you have it properly aligned, you can move on to the next step, installation of the actuator bolts. So here I have the 5mm hex bolts that we're talking about installed by hand. I'll go ahead and I'll list the torque specs. Now it's torqued down, which is critical when installing brake components. Gotta make sure it's properly torqued. So we're gonna move on to the next step. We're gonna grab this caliper, we're gonna swing it around down onto the brake pads as you would a regular brake job. You gotta make sure the piston is retracted, as it is in this case, to allow proper installation around the brake pads. Here I have the caliper installed. We're gonna have to properly tighten those 14mm bolts on the side. Remember to tighten those bolts. You're gonna need a 17mm wrench to hold the sliding pin in order to properly torque it. I'll list the torque specs above. Last step, you're gonna go ahead and plug in your electronic parking brake actuator connector. Remove the lug nut that was holding down the rotor. Next, install the wheel and tighten up the lug nut. Once those are tightened down, go ahead, remove your jack stand and lower down the vehicle. One of the last steps, we're going to go ahead and turn the vehicle to the key on position, engine off.
Gonna go ahead and make sure that our electronic parking brake works. Step on the brake and pull on the parking brake button. You're gonna hear it engaging. And once the light turns on, that means that it's properly engaged. Push down on it to release it. Just make sure it properly works. Next, go ahead and start the vehicle. You want to pump the brake pedal, make sure you get proper brake application, and then you move on to your road test. Okay, so we just came back from our road test. Happy to say that the vehicle is braking properly. During this procedure, you want to make sure that there are no brake noises, abnormal noises as you step on the brakes. You also want to avoid any panic sudden stops during this braking period. The properly braking period is 20 to 40 slowdown stops from 30 to 50 miles per hour. And that will do it for this video. I really hope that this helped. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment down below. And lastly, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.